Jack Davy would say, hi-ho, everybody. I'm David Dufty, and I'm taking you on a time tour of the Bouddi Peninsula, including Hardy's Bay, Pretty Beach, Wagstaff and Kilcare. We start our journey here at Woy Woy, back in the 1920s, because this was the place where so many great holidays began. On your left is Blackwell Road with shops, including the bread factory, owned by Helen Dufty's father, Vic Percival. On your right is Woy Woy Station. You could take a taxi or a bus to local destinations like Booker Bay or Ettalong, or you could catch a launch to our destination, Hardy's Bay. In order to get here, we had to cross the Hawkesbury River Bridge, which was opened way back in 1889. This bridge was most significant in the history of our area. We got grit in our eyes and smoke in our lungs as we rattled through the tunnels with the lights off and the windows stuck open. Who can forget that smell? At last the families, with lots of luggage and weary or hyperactive kids, arrived at Woy Woy Station to catch the launch to Hardy's Bay. You need to cross over the railway line. You may have to wait a while for your launch to leave, so maybe Mum could do some crocheting while you're waiting. Maybe your launch is just coming down the channel now. Can you hear it? It's a busy scene. Make sure you brought your Goldenia tea. You can always check the timetable to see what time the launch to Kilcare goes. And make sure you catch the right launch to the right place. Catholics tended to catch the Murphy's ferry to Kilcare, while the Protestants caught the Owens ferries. I'm going to hand you over now to the Kluger sisters, Ruth Hawkshaw and Joan Smith, who will give you a first-hand account of the ferry trip to Hardy's Bay.
When we arrived at Woy Woy Station from Chatswood, where we lived, we'd get out of the train, come down to close to the bakery shop that Helen was referring to, and the Bayview Hotel. The men would all go into the Bayview Hotel and have their Friday night schooner. And sometimes they might have two, I would think. But the women and children didn't do that. All the women and children carried on down to the launch, which was waiting for us at the Woy Woy Wharf. We'd all get on, the deckhand would put our luggage up on the top, Clary Riley, who died recently, aged 100. And then we'd be sitting there waiting, and the driver would toot the horn, or whatever it is. And then suddenly all the men, like a whole lot of kids, as you know men are, would all be laughing and joking, running as fast as they could down to the wharf, get on, and all the wives would then go for them, holding us all up. Well, you must have had two schooners instead of one, and all this carried on. My mother used to do it. So when the men got over that little turn, we'd go down Woy Woy Channel, and we'd just about get to the end of the channel where the bowling club is now, Woy Woy Bowling Club is now. And Dad would turn around and say, all together now, and we'd sing.
What would you sing? Go on.
Fall in and follow me, fall in and follow me.
Go on, Jen, go.
Keep going.
Fall in, never mind the weather, all together. Stand by me, boys, I know the way to go. I'll take you for a spree. You do as I do, and you'll do right. Fall in and follow me. That was very
good. We head off now down the Woy Woy Channel, through the famous Rip, and on towards Hardy's Bay. There was no Rip Bridge, no mansions, just small holiday cottages dotting the waterfront in the settled areas. Now the holiday makers are almost at the Bouddi Peninsula, with the deckhand ready with his landline. He throws it from quite a distance and never misses. Well, hardly ever. Here we are at Hardy's Bay Wharf, and I'll hand you over now to Pam Mainsbridge, nay Pam Kirby, who was right there at the time.
I was only very small at the time, as you can see, but I do remember we arrived with my mother, my aunt, my sister, my brother and my cousin. It was a sort of a ritual that we would come all together and enjoy the holiday. It would have been a school holiday time. Truro Downs. Truro met every ferry, every launch that came in and every launch that departed. We loved Truro. He was Hardy's Bay. When we saw him on the wharf, we were so excited. We'd jump off the ferry, or as best we could, and we'd hug him and kiss him. My mother could like to tell us not to do that because, after all, he didn't tub very often, if ever. But she couldn't tell us because we would have told Truro we weren't allowed to kiss him. Here we are at the point at Hardy's Bay, right down on the point where the wharf used to be in those days. And I'm the little one at the end. That's me, little tot, my sister Moya, Truro, my brother Alan and my cousin Enid.
Now, Bruce Dunlop knew Truro very well. Bruce, what's your memory?
Truro died when I was about 14 years of age, so it was all children's stuff that I knew. He used to intrigue us that he could meet us at the local wharf as we got off the launch, and even if he hadn't seen you for 12 months, he would remember your name. And he'd speak to you in this little falsetto voice that he had for this occasion, and that was always, "Hello Brucey, how are you?" And we used to be very, very intrigued with this, and of course every child in the area had their different opinions. Some thought he was a terrific guy and a lovely person, and some of the little girls were absolutely terrified. They'd run a mile rather than say hello to Truro. The period is about 1910. My great uncle and great aunt are in the film, and it shows the whole family group. But that's how Truro was with our family and with other families of Hardy's Bay. Everybody sort of looked after him. Mum had asked me to go off just before we'd go home and so find Truro Downs, and he'd come over and Mum would give him anything that was left over from the house, and food and tea and all sort of things, because we were only travelling with suitcases, and with the result that no one took much home with them, so Truro was a great receiver of those goods. He was a great fisherman, and always someone that you love to have with you, and we have here another image of Truro with William Montgomery, my uncle, and Truro is looking as though he's almost gone back to being a tribesman again with a spear, but he was very good at catching lobster, and he taught every child, I think, that I knew of Hardy's Bay. Everybody there knew how to catch flathead or to catch potty mullet to use for bait, and he was a great teacher of all sorts of things marine-like. Good swimmer and a great sculler.
We'll give our wonderful Colin Smith the last word on Truro.
He was a lovely, lovely, beautiful man, and on Empire Day at Pretty Beach School we were allowed to come in clothes representing all the world, and Truro would love to come down, and when the day was finished the ladies would give him a parcel of cake. Now when Truro went fishing at Hardy's Bay Wharf, he'd tie his sand shoes together and hang them over the wharf so they'd dry, get whiten, and his cats would follow him down. One cat was called Purcell, other cats were called funny names, can't repeat that. and he was really very, very popular.
Now let's explore Hardy's Bay with long-term holiday maker and resident Ruth Hawkshaw.
Here we are at Hardy's Bay in the 30s. It was a great place for a holiday. Many of the houses had been built by the owners from timber and fibro and corrugated iron. Brought to the area by cargo vessels, it was a wonderful place for children. You can see the swings, the tides, the rowing boats. This is the baths beside the Hardy's Bay Wharf and in front of Knox General Store. I learnt to swim in those baths, at high tide of course. The water was clean and many crabs scuttled back and forth on the shoreline at low tide, mainly soldier crabs. They walked sideways. The cows, owned by the Martin Dairy at Putty Beach, used to roam from the dairy early in the morning, around the front of Hardy's Bay, past Knox Store, around the point and along the waterfront track to Pretty Beach Extension Wharf near the school. Then home again via Heath Road and up the hill next to Clucas's Shoalhaven, across the hill behind the present RSL Club, and thence back to the dairy at Putty Beach for milking, eating grass all the way. The Hardy's Bay General Store, owned by Mr. Knock and his wife Bella. It was a general meeting place each morning after the Woy Woy ferry had delivered passengers, goods, and most importantly, the mail. The only public phone was situated on the veranda of the store. There was a lift-up, small window between the store and the veranda through which the mail was passed to the recipient, and also a long seating bench on the veranda where one sat and yarned and waited for the mail to be sorted. The Hardy's Bay Hall was built by Joe Booth as a commercial venture on land owned by him. Joe Booth came to the area about 1920 and built the hall, his own home Zambezi, now owned by Glenda and Stephen Dunlop, and a very small house he called the Crib on Heath Road opposite Zambezi. Public dances were held every Saturday night during the holiday season and holiday weekends, and sometimes on Sunday nights, commencing at midnight on Saturdays. A gentleman called Bert played the piano for the dancing and announced the dances. Bert sat with his back to the dancers. He would look around and say, "Barn dance, plain ordinary," or "foxtrot," with his back to the dancers.
But incidentally, the ferries used to come, and on Christmas Eve, the ferries would run all night. The ferries would run all night, and they'd have these moonlight excursions, and then they'd come back to Kilcairn, and then what we call the actual Uniting Church now was a public hall, and then they'd have what they call a midnight dance, and they'd dance there till the sun came up. Then they'd go home and they'd go to the beach all day, and it was rather a very, very good life, really.
This is me, aged approximately 22, with my first car, a 1928 Oldsmobile Tourer, and I'm standing in the driveway of the original Shoalhaven, built of fibro with an iron roof, and stone piers quarried from the property at the back. This is Shoalhaven, renovated by my father, Ernest Clucas, for their retirement. You will notice the buildings to the left include a laundry and a very classy dunny, the classiest dunny in Hardy's Bay, and it had a trapdoor at the back that the toilet man didn't have to go into the toilet at all.
Before leaving Hardy's Bay, let's meet some of the locals. Firstly, a group back in the 1920s from the inner city suburbs of Sydney. Joe Booth is the one with the pommy cap. He built Zambezi in the background and the community hall. His wife Kitty is on his left, and next to her is Ruth's mother, Margaret Clucas. Here's a more stylish group in front of Jim Callender's house, Turo. They're all ready to leave on the ferry on a Sunday evening. And yet another delightful group from the early days, who I think speak for themselves. Pretty Beach was a growing holiday resort early in the century. It was reached by launch, not by road. There was no road around the bay at that time, just grassy tracks. Lucas General Provider is the title of this 1910 Broadhurst postcard. The colouring leaves something to be desired, but it reminds us that it was not a black and white world, but a colourful one, just as it is today. In 1925, the store, where the present tennis courts are located, had been rebuilt, and on the opposite corner was the local bakery. Bill Dodd and his two daughters, Helen and Colleen, provided us with vivid images of holiday times in Pretty Beach. Bill, currently aged 92, lives by himself in his elevated cottage, Gumleaf, which he built back in the 1950s. The family bought a block in Highview Road, and there they camped. They would bring all their gear up from Sydney on the coastal ship Erina. Bill's mum would spend most of her holidays cooking between two big rocks. They had no power, no running water, kerosene lamps, pit toilets, and they bathed in a natural spring nearby. Lobster Beach figured prominently in the lives of the Dodd family. The kids played happily in the hills nearby. It was at Lobster Beach one day, when Bill was fishing at Brim Rock, that a beautiful young woman came walking around the rock. And so began a lifelong love story featuring Bill Dodd and Beryl Beattie. Lobster Beach had a number of shacks owned by holiday makers. This one belonged to Harry and Gay Phillips, with its concrete floor and extension for Grandma. It was bought in a pub for £50. Overflow accommodation was in a tent, with convenient access to the dunny. Night time was a great time for sitting around campfires, having a drink and swapping yarns. No TV needed in those days. Bill was interviewed but found it hard at 92 to give a full account of the past. However, he remembered this occasion very well.
Well, I caught him. He nearly buggered me up. I caught him, and the thing I shouldn't have done, I brought him into the boat, and he went berserk, swishing his teeth. He nearly smashed it to bits.
Before there were house numbers, every house had a name. Beryl Dodd was intrigued by Pretty Beach names and jotted them down on paper. Cooey was built early in the century and was really very beautiful with its latticed verandas. Maisie was a later, more typical fibro cottage with room for all the family. By this time, cars could make it to Pretty Beach along the rough scenic road from Gosford. Wiona is one of the few remaining heritage houses in our area. Here it is as it was first built, with its open verandas. Here's Wiona with the veranda enclosed, and it's had lots more improvements since those days, but it's still going strong today. Gwen Perry, or as she was then, Gwen Greenhow, grew up in Pretty Beach. In fact, we can call her Miss Pretty Beach, as you will find out in a moment. Gwen, you went to Pretty Beach School.
Yes, I went to Pretty Beach School. Was one of the very happiest times of my life. It was a beautiful school. It was very small, and it had a huge big room which had sliding glass doors, and they would make it one room or two rooms. We had garden that went round the back, which was all cactus gardens. This is the Pretty Beach store, which was built earlier than me, and it was the hub of Pretty Beach. All the young women and men gathered there and have ice creams and such forth. The Bowsers were sort of rather trendy at that stage. There was a ice cream bar on the right-hand side where all the kids would congregate after school and thought they were very, very trendy. Here we are at the store again, and you can see that there's a building along the side to the left which was used as a meeting place, as a playroom, as a dancing hall. Then you go across to, there's the bakehouse on the corner opposite with a greengrocer alongside.
In the 1960s, the old store became Don and Jean Radford's fish, prawns, bait and tackle shop, with fresh fish straight from Don's boat, which he built himself behind the shop. St Peter's Church figured prominently in Gwen's life and in the life of the community. There were concerts and much dressing up and lots of fun by all. And there were Sunday school picnics, this one at Kilcare Beach, led by Miss Jennings on the left. And as Gwen says,
we had lovely times at this stage in our life. St Peter's Church at Wagstaff. This was the altar for my sister's wedding that she had, and it was a very important time in our life and very loving.
And here is the bridal party after the ceremony. And as Gwen says,
it was our very happy day.
And here she is, Gwen Greenhow, Miss Pretty Beach, Miss Kilcare, 1953, with a prize that included this fine studio portrait. In later years, Gwen Perry, as she became, and her fellow bookend, Faye Gunther, played a major role in Pretty Beach Wagstaff community life. Let's move on now to Wagstaff, firstly remembering that all around the bay was home to our first people, and the evidence of their countless years of settlement is still abundantly available in caves and middens. The Wagstaff family were early settlers and gave their name to the area, which was subdivided back in 1906. The blocks were sold and holiday cottages appeared on them. The blocks along the waterfront were very narrow, and the houses, some still remaining, had to be skinny too. This postcard described Wagstaff as the prettiest place on earth. Note Manly House and the mini golf course opposite where the hall stands today. Manly House was built on the site of the old Wagstaff family home, and it was a favourite holiday guest house from early in the 20th century, as you can see by the ladies' clothing. Those big hats were handy in 1910 when you went out for a row with father doing the hard work. You would need to hang on to them on the open deck of the launch, however. Waterfront homes, with their own wharf and pool, were great places for holiday gatherings. John and Pam Moore are the present owners of a beautiful and historic waterfront home.
This is our house, called Harlaxton, built back in 1923. The name Harlaxton stems from Harlaxton Manor in England, built by Gregory in the early 1800s to replace an earlier manor house built in the 1300s. There is another Harlaxton in Toowoomba, Queensland, built by the Gregory family in the mid-1800s. Harlaxton Wagstaff was built in 1923 by Walter Gregory, a nephew of Augustus Gregory, a well-known Australian explorer and surveyor. Holiday houses include the Melvilles next door. Their family had a great collection of photos like this one, with 25 people in their swimming costumes of the day in front of the Gregory's house. Walter Gregory can be seen in the photo all dressed up for having fun. Here we see the swimming pool as the centre of attraction, especially at high tide on a warm, sunny morning. The Moore family came to Harlaxton in 1943, and the tradition of family and neighbour gatherings has been continued over the years. This is our family in 1995. Fishing was a major pastime at Wagstaff, and a time-honoured tradition was nailing the heads of large fish caught by people to the front of a boat shed. These fish were mainly flathead and jewfish. This was evidence, without exaggeration, of the fish actually caught. This dewie, which is a big one, was attacked by a shark while being landed. Another tradition was to clean the fish caught on the boat shed walls or the walking planks of the swimming baths. Our family pets always joined in, hoping for a feed, along with the local pelicans as seen here.
Let's hear now from one who remembers the days before the demise of Manly House. Meet Alan Stewart, whose parents ran the store 1937 to 1945.
This is the Wagstaff store in 1938. If you look to the left, you'll see the Post Office and Commonwealth Bank, which was tucked in behind the public phone booth there. The wooden veranda across the front was removed by my father following the fire in Manly House. Inside the store, my dad used to boast that he could sell anything from a needle to an anchor. Some of the things I remember about the store is weighing up goods because everything came in bulk. And one little thing that not everybody knew was there was a trapdoor in the floor, and Dad used to put chocolates and things down in there to keep them cool in the very hot weather. This is our family group with me on the right hand side. It was taken in the small lounge room that we had, and you'll notice the old radio in the background. We used to sit in this room gazing into the embers of an open fire and listen to the radio. And one of the features in the radio was a story called The Witch's Tale. It was very, very scary. Mulhall Street in 1944. Now, one of the things we used to do here was grass sledding. We made sleds with a couple of tree suckers shaped like hockey sticks, put a footboard and a seat on them, and then we would go up into the bush and slide down on the leaf mould and out onto this grassy area down Mulhall Street. Now you can see all the obstacles that we had to dodge on the way, and I'll tell you what, we had many an accident. Here we have a group of the boys that used to go to high school from Wagstaff. We used to catch the ferry about 7 in the morning. Now if you see the Ron Walters in the back on the left, he would have to walk from Kilcare Heights to Wagstaff before that so that we could catch the ferry, which would take us either to Ettalong or Booker Bay, depending upon how the tide was. Bus from that point to Woy Woy, train from Woy Woy to Gosford, and then walk up the hill to Gosford High School. So it was quite an effort to get to school in those days. In the meantime, the ladies of the area, they had a lot of social activity, particularly with the tennis. And if you look at the tennis outfits of the day, where they used to go off and play tennis round at Holwell's courts at Pretty Beach or some of the courts in Wagstaff itself. One fateful day in the history of Wagstaff was when Manly House caught fire, and this was to change the character of Wagstaff for years to come. My father was there, and there was a book laying on the ground burning over at Manly House, and as the pages burnt, they blew off and blew across towards the shop. So Dad was rather busy running around with a bucket of water, dousing these sparks and embers.
Kevin Walther remembers what happens next.
On the site of the old Manly house, which was burnt down, the Wagstaff Hall was built. The right-hand end, you can see the projection box. I can remember Granny Radford worked tirelessly for the community and especially for building the hall.
Now to Wagstaff Point, where Rod and Pat Radford are our hosts in an old house packed with memories. For example, this very important photo, taken back in 1916, shows the extent of the land before erosive forces washed much of it away.
These were normal high tides, roughened by the ocean waves, lasted for some weeks, and would pound the seawalls and require constant sandbag protection or coral tree planting and finally rebuilding of seawalls. It's hard to comprehend the extent of the erosion and the number of houses that were removed before we bought lots 1, 2 and 3 in 1938. However, a comparison here does give some idea of the extent of the erosion in 1920. We found many relatives and friends wanted to share our first happiness of our one home, Golden Sands, and a shed at Wagstaff. So, with the help of Reg Wright, we learned to cut rock to build another house and strengthen seawalls. Our new stone house, Silver Spray, is seen in the lower right-hand corner, adjacent to our first cottage, Golden Sands. Wire protected sea bars along the beautiful sandy beach were well used for many years with a contest of amateur water polo. Eventually, as we increased the tenant demand, Mrs. Horn sold us the adjacent lot 4 with its private wharf, 3 cottages, Lotus, Boomerang and Santoy. Santoy was on a permissive occupancy and built over the water. The magic of Santoy, named by Mrs. Horn after an early musical operetta, gave us the opportunity of giving our enlarging property the name of Santoy Estate. Our biggest setback came with the severe storm of 1956, which reached its peak at midnight with a record tide of 7'6". Santoy Cottage and its wharf were destroyed. The low rock and cement west boundary fence on lot 1 was quite dramatically demolished. So much so the following day, 4 senior council officers came to investigate. The advice and permission from these officers, who were the engineer, mayor, chief clerk and health inspector, was to build a circular wall conforming to the engineer's direction. With the advantage of the circular wall, we thought that further reclamation was unnecessary. However, the seawall was constantly threatened and had to be supported by further reclamation. We successfully defended the challenge from the Department of Lands when we found the 1916 photos. All the reclamation, the cutting and handling of rocks was most important. Initially, Reg Wright was our help. Here I see my mother and father, helped by an experienced Irishman, building a building of rough stone in the Irish custom. We used this technique for toilet blocks and storage. All this was exciting work that gave a feeling of being worthwhile. Large slabs of rock were priced from the hillside with crowbars. Broken down with gads and hammers, the better pieces were squared off in the shape of building. The rest were barrowed or trolled out to a point where they were stacked to make a seawall.
And so the Radfords, by filling in behind the sea walls, were able to restore the land lost to the tides and provide a fine recreation area for the holiday tenants of the Santoy estate. Now let's hear again from Kevin Walther, one of the tenants at the Santoy estate.
Yes, that's me in the front of the rowing boat, of which was always included with the rent, and we regularly stayed at the Santoy estate from around the mid-40s. Radfords were very good to us. We used to love staying in that house at the end, right at the end. Very comfortable house, and it even had the old kerosene primers that we used for cooking. We used to stay in Santoy itself, and very worrying one night when the water came up with the high tide and my mother packed the bags ready for us to go. Holidays were a sad time because they came to an end and we had to get dressed up, collar and tie, because eventually we travelled on the train. We would all gather at the wharf, which was right beside Santoy itself, and sadly we'd get on the ferry and off we'd go.
This was the way we developed Santoy, to gain a happiness we shared with so many people.
Rod Radford, who was a pharmacist at Ettalong, was also the owner of the amazing Amphicar. Read the story in the accompanying CD-ROM. Now let's head back to Kilcare. We could row back, or maybe paddle a canoe, or you could even travel on your own self-made vessel, but it might be a bit hazardous. So here we are at Kilcare Wharf, and I'm going to ask the little boy on the left, Don Anderson, to tell you all about it.
We were very familiar with this wharf. We'd get off the launches when we arrived. We would play there too in the baths that you see. Wasn't much good at low tide. There was not too much water there and plenty of weeds and reeds. But we still had lots of fun because we were both good swimmers, my brother and I. The shop was the focus point of Kilcare for us. That's where we picked up the key. When we rented a house, we'd get the key there, we'd check things out, and the parents would carry the luggage from the wharf down to the house that we'd hired for whatever time. We'd climb the hill sometimes, and that must have required quite a bit of effort. But generally speaking, the shop was the focal point because that's where we got our food. And they were within walking distance of the houses in the area. And this is one of the reasons why you had a selection of shops at each wharf from Wagstaff round to Kilcare. When I was a child, Kilcare Road fascinated me. It seemed to be composed of a very orange-coloured gravel. When we came across on the launch around Daly's Point, you could see it in the distance. It really did stand out, much more than it does today. Just 3/4 of the way up the hill, we'd turn right off Kilcare Road, walking upward. And there was a shortcut which led people through to Beach Drive. It saved us going that extra distance with heavy bags and things like that. And one time there was a bushfire, and we sat in this on this track and waited till the bushfire had gone. And this was just off Kilcare Road. Many houses are there now. There weren't many cars at Kilcare in the old days, but looking at a wet Kilcare Road with very, very slushy gravel, you can see that driving around the area in the vehicles of the day was quite a challenge for any motorist who happened to be brave enough to get out there. This vehicle, driving through very pristine bush forest surroundings, has already negotiated some very, very difficult hill climbs just south of McMaster's Beach, where the road was very, very rough and rocky. It faced a further effort to get down into Kilcare because there are a series of hairpin bends which in those days, particularly on a wet day, would have been quite difficult to negotiate. We had great fun on the waterfront, particularly at low tide. There were thousands of soldier crabs, and other crabs as well, but it was the soldier crabs that really caught our attention as they swarmed about the sand. And we'd wander along, getting our feet very dirty and muddy and going down probably in some places up to our knees. And it was holiday fun at its very best.
Colleen Smith was a local resident and she worked in the stores.
But the stores gave a very, very good service and would stay open until 10 o'clock at night, which was very handy. Mail, it would come to Hardy's Bay Post Office, and then a little canvas bag would come over to the general store. And everyone had to come down the general store because there was no postal delivery. So it really worked out very well because generally they popped in and bought something. And incidentally then the mail was taken back, and at one time we had about 9 post boxes around the district where you dropped your mail in, and it was cleared and then taken by ferry, and that was a big thing, seeing the mail come in. Everyone would be looking, oh, here's the ferry coming, we'll be able to get our mail. And the ferries played a very big part of everyone's life from Wagstaff to Kilcare. Waterfront houses, they were holiday houses, but they would come up, the owners, or have tenants in, but the highlight would be the piano that was at the back of the shop in quite a nice large room, and different ones would get there of a Saturday night and they'd vamp away at the piano, dance away, but milkshakes sold well and soft drinks and ice creams, and it was very popular. And up till only a few years ago, many people would say to me, but Colleen, it's not like it used to be, it's not like it used to be. And they made their own fun with their fishing and their dancing and going to the beach. People were very, very sharing and very, very caring those days. I think today the life is a different concept. People doing their own thing. Mrs. Next Door could die, they wouldn't probably know.
Holidaymakers have been coming to Kilcare for 100 years, and the children have delighted in their time here, like this group. Mark Twain could have made a great story out of this crowd if he'd come to Kilcare on his visit to Australia. Bert Meyer is a different story. He grew up here, born in 1917. He and his family have lived in Blythe Street for over 90 years.
That's our family. That's my mother and father. That's me on the horse. That's George, Ted, May, Rose and Frank up there. But the eldest daughter, she died when she was 10. She's not in this, but that was all the rest of our family. Around about, I was about, about 5 or 6 then. Yeah, in the 1920s that would be.
The family owned land near Fletcher's Glen, now Fraser Road. Bert's father, Mick, was a builder. They ran pigs and poultry and a dairy farm and grew vegetables, which later on Bert sold from his barrow. There was no school at Pretty Beach, so this is what happened.
At 7 we walked Empire Bay School.
Yes.
2 years before this one was built around there, 1926.
I can take a photograph.
1926, 27.
Now, where was the track to Empire Bay?
Well, it was a fairly good one. Sometimes we walked up over the hill, just past the corner from Fletcher's Glen there. We used to have a track right straight up over the hill there, but most times we walked right round the bay, Riley's Bay, and the school was just in the saddle of the hill at Empire Bay. We just walked up over Pat Murray's, where he had his farm there, where the old brick house was,
yes,
and walked up and over and down and through people named Cousins' place and into the school there.
Right.
It's just the saddle of the hill, the lowest part of the hill.
Yes.
Mostly we did that way,
yeah,
because this was pretty steep.
Let's move now further along the Kilcare extension and meet the active and laughter-loving octogenarian Sid Jenkins. Sid lived in this depression dwelling with his uncle and aunt during the Great Depression, when his uncle could find no work in Sydney. Amazingly, it was still standing, just, at the time of the interview. And tell us about the old, is that the stove and the fireplace
Yeah,
as well?
and the grandmother had one of those chains with those big ovens, you know,
Yes.
and you'd hang that over the fire. And then we got the other little fire later on. We got that more modern.
Yeah, yeah. And there was a bedroom.
The
there.
bedroom,
Yeah.
if you just come over here,
Yeah.
the bedroom's up the far end.
Right.
Far end,
Yeah.
that's where the women slept. And here, that's what I used to sleep alongside of there,
Right. So for
in a settee.
For 4 years, you slept on a settee.
Yeah, and the others had the beds.
Yeah.
And the women were in the other end. And this is where we cooked and everything.
Yeah.
And then we had the big table out here in the summer, and that's where we had our Christmas. Oh, but they were good days.
Yeah.
You know, you never get those days again. You know yourself. We've seen the best.
And this was their thunderbox. Yeah.
That's not bad for that kind of toilet, is
It's
it?
pretty good, yeah.
And just before he died, that's the best it's ever been.
Yeah.
In the early days, it was worse than that. But you'd tar them,
Yes.
and in the place where they used to take all the business was that we buried ours right there.
Oh, right. So you have to bury yours stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
bury it just in there. And the thing is, the others, all the other houses, it'd be taken over to Kilcare Beach up that way, because that's where they used to bury all the peoples.
Let's move on now to Riley's Bay, where if you struggle through Lantana and Bitu, you will find the remains of the Murray house, mentioned by Bert. This house, constructed with local stone, dates back to 1836, and the Murrays were one of the early settlers in the area. The Riley family then purchased the land from the Murrays, and Quentin Riley took us on a tour of the area where the family grazed cows, planted a garden, and lived self-sufficiently on the land.
And my grandfather's boats, my grandfather was a sea captain, William Riley. He plied between here and Sydney, and his two boats were moored out there in the open water, well beyond the bay here. Too tricky to try and bring a sailing boat into the bay. There's a very narrow channel right up in that southern corner, and keel would have probably bumped even at a high tide getting in there. So he moored them out in the middle, and then he travelled between here and Sydney and back again with goods, mostly shell for lime burning, and he brought building materials back with him. You'll see a lot of sandstones being used around here by my Uncle John, because he had oyster leases in the bay here for 70 years, and he used a lot of stone in his early leases, and so I think they pinched the stone from the house to build their leases with. My dad was born here in the bay, and my grandfather came here in the 1860s. The original home was over behind us. It was a two-room home, and all the children were born in that home. And I'm not quite sure of the total quantity, but William had 11 from his first marriage, and then he married my grandma, which is Isabella Frost, when she was 16, and he had another fairly large brood from Isabella, so he's pretty busy, and I think he had around about 18 or 19 children total. My dad was one of the last to be born, and he certainly looked after himself because he lived at home with my mother till he was over 100. I can't tell you much more about the bay other than the fact that about Rupert's dairy herd, which was quite operational, Dad's little escapade in market gardening, and the rest of the time my grandmother existing here. I would say too that my grandmother really loved the old times, because right up to 1953 she had no running water in the house, a very small tank at the back, and no electricity. I didn't put the power on here till the mid-1980s, so they had no hot electricity to boil water, so they boiled everything over the fuel stove, and they had kerosene lanterns for their light at night. So she very much lived in the old-fashioned way.
Quentin made a film inside Mount Earl, and you can see the evidence of changes over the years. We're off now to the surfing beach. Pam Mainbridge fondly remembers those days. Just here, right.
That's the beautiful scene of the beach, as it was in those days. Lovely rolling sand hills that we used to play in, and they remained until the rutile mining. washed them away. Playing in the sandhills, as we called them in those days, the sandies, and we loved going in there and playing and rolling down the hills. My brother on the left, then me, Pamela, then my cousin Enid and my sister Moya.
Little girls grow up and become beach belles in the surf club photo collection. Here are Joan Caulfield, Moya, Grace Dunn and Pamela in 1944 on a summer Saturday. Pam tells us the weekends were never dull. Apart from the beach, there were dances at the hall. As the lights were lamplight, they didn't worry much about what they looked like. They would dance until they dropped.
And the bogey hole, you can see, was a beautiful place. We still love it, and we still have watched over the years how it's changed, how it's been dredged out and refilled.
Colin, the young lady on the right, is here to tell us about World War II years at the beach.
During the war years, my mother woke us up, my sister and I, and she said, "Can you hear funny noises?" And my sister said, "It sounds like horses' hoofs." Sure enough, when I went down to the shop the next morning, here was about 14 or 15 soldiers out the front waiting to see if they could buy something to eat. They had all came from Charlestown, and they had came on by horses and whatever, but they'd been a week coming down, and they were a contingent from Rutherford, Morpeth, Maitland, all out sort of the Hunter Valley, and they dug in down at Martinside and also down the Fisherman's End. One of the saddest days ever in Kilcare. It was during the war, and the Japanese looked like they wanted to come and stay, but at any rate they took every conceivable boat out the area, and they were towed down to Windsor, and I understand some were left at Gosford Showground. And people, I can remember one, Mr Dave McErath, and they said, "Poor old Dave, he's crying, look," and there wasn't a boat left in the district. So that if the Japs had landed, they couldn't have gotten further. And at Kilcare Beach, they had barbed wire about 6 feet up, going from the surf club right along in strands. So if the Japanese had landed at Kilcare Beach, they could not have got over all this barbed wire.
Kilcare Surf Club was an essential part of Putty Beach history. The club building survived a landslide in 1948. The sea provided other memorable occasions. There were dramatic rescues and tragic days when lives were lost. Alan Cameron sets the scene for one such day back in 1952.
It was a very high tide, New Year's Day high tide, and it was a huge... The sea wasn't rough, but there were big waves coming in. And I figured that... I, as part of the surf group on patrol there, I did try to get out to crack a wave and found that I was knocked back by all the white water. So sitting there on the beach, I figured that as the tide dropped, people would be able to get out further onto the sandbank, and of course with a 6'6" or so high tide and with the big waves coming in, they then, I predicted, would form gutters and there'd be huge undertows going out to sea, and that's exactly what happened. We closed the beach at my suggestion, and that afternoon we were due to go to a surf carnival at, where was it, Avoca or McMaster's. And what actually happened was, we closed the beach with, in those days it was crossed flags. There was no English sign saying beach closed, it was just crossed flags, and of course lots of people come to the beach from Sydney, they wouldn't have known what a cross flag was. We left a couple of lifesavers who didn't come to the carnival. We took off to the carnival, and I thought nothing more of it till we got this urgent call that afternoon that there'd been people swept out to sea in this undertow. It was described in the Herald that we rowed all the way back from Avoca. And in fact, at the time we just cracked a huge wave onto the beach, and a friend of mine who was in the the crowd said there was a great gasp from the crowd as we come spearing down this rather green wave, and it wasn't a dump, it was an easy, big wave, but easy to crack with a surf boat. And because we actually we got the call to come back, and we loaded the boat up onto the truck, and we came back to the fishermen's end of the beach to ensure that we could get out through the rough surf anyway, so we was calm at that end. How many were drowned, I don't know, but one fellow was sort of blue in the face, obviously a heart attack, and but we patrolled the beach for being on the holiday time for a few days, and never recovered the missing body. One good thing about it, if I can say there was a good thing about it, was that from then on cross flags were out, and the English signs were put up, beach closed. That was brought into being all along the coast. No more cross flags, just denote a closed beach. A visual English sign saying beach closed.
Getting the wooden boats back into the surf club was a caterpillian task after high tides had washed the beach away. There are annual carnivals on the beach, with this day being brightened by the presence of the Lakemba Scots Band. The men of the club were heroes at many a carnival, like this one at Terrigal. But what of the women and the kids? Terry Mears, can you tell us about it?
The women were firstly members of the Ladies Auxiliary as seen here in 1955. Beverly White, née Annand, fifth from the left in this group, recalls as follows. We loved our old surf club, but the women from the Ladies Auxiliary were not allowed in the holy sacred grail. With its tin roof, fibro walls and showers, the holes in the back of the walls from the rocks falling from the hill behind. Later on, after the Ladies Auxiliary had objected and were allowed in, the men had drilled peepholes in the showers. Eventually, the ladies were able to join the get-together on Friday nights, and we were treated with much respect. After all, we did raise money to keep the club going. This is a photo of myself taken at Kilcare Beach with one of my 9-foot longboards and some of my trophies I've won in competitions. I started surfing in 1963, taking longboards out of the old surf club, thoroughly enjoyed it. Continued on until now, and I'm 59 years old, won a couple of, won one Australian title, local titles, and have enjoyed my surfing very much, and hopefully I'll continue to do it until I'm well into my 70s, all going well. This photo is of some of the boys in the Nippers in 1969. Nippers started a little bit earlier than that. Children from the local area relied on the Sunday Nippers. Everybody loved going, or most of the kids loved going, all the kids from pre-beach school. The surf club was the hub of the community in those days. Later on, the kids went on to include the girls, mainly boys at the start. Girls were included later on. They were called Nippers and Nipperettes. They actually combined themselves to be called the Nippers, and the girls had a little bit of trouble carrying the reels, the larger reels, but later on they made smaller ones. But the kids of today enjoy the Nippers, and I think it's the best thing that ever happened. The ever-changing face of Kilcare Beach, it's something that is never the same from week to week, with sand disappearing, the bogey hole filling up, the beach eroding, large seas just take the sand away, nor'easters bringing the sand back in, filling the beaches up again. Kilcare Beach is the most beautifulest place in the Central Coast, and I wouldn't want to live anywhere else.
Let's proceed now to the fisherman's end of Putty Beach. Alan Cameron's father, Alec, second from the right, suffered injury in World War I, and life was a struggle for the family of 6 children. particularly during the Depression years of the 1930s. Fishing was their main source of income. Mullet have long been fished from Fisherman's End, and this precarious tower was used to watch out for the shoals. Beverly Wyatt, née Anand, recalls thinking,
"However did they climb up the tripod tower, which was made from saplings and driftwood? My dad, Bert Anand, was very skilled at reading the water by the shadows and the ripples. He would sing out 'Boats!' which would be launched straight away with nets. This would be peak time around Easter."
With the aid of a net, the shoal was drawn into the beach, with the help of lots of hard yanking. A boatload of fish was the result, with the problem remaining of transporting them as quickly as possible to the Sydney markets. Sometimes they didn't make it in good condition in these pre-refrigeration days.
Sometimes they got so many mullet that they gave them away on the beach, and they would bury them in the sand so they wouldn't spoil. The fish markets would only take so many boxes at a time.
In the 1960s, Fisherman's End and most of the foredunes along the beach were devastated by the sand mining industry, and the high dunes, seen earlier in this film, were seen no more. Mining did bring jobs to the area, and you can see how dune grass was planted to assist the stabilisation process. However, bitu bush and lantana also entered the picture, and the battle still goes on with these and other noxious weeds. To complete our time tour, we move now to the plateau area of the Bouddi Peninsula, with its steep escarpments dropping down to Fletcher's Glen and Maitland Bay. Who needs to travel to Wineglass Bay in Tasmania when we have our own wine glass full and overflowing at Maitland Bay, seen here in these fine aerial shots by Manfred Gottschalk. We remember again that these escarpments were excellent dwelling places for Aboriginal people, and this air-conditioned cave, with its patio and fine view, is surrounded by evidence of settlement for countless centuries, including cutting tools and shells shaped into fishing hooks. Timber was cut from this area, and you can see why, gazing up at the straight and stately blackbutt, which is 150 feet tall. Bullock teams would have been seen in early days, snigging the timber out of the forest, like this one at McMaster's Beach. The plateau area in the triangle between the scenic road, Maitland Bay Drive and Wards Hill Road, with its deep lateritic soil, was fine for growing tomatoes, passion fruit, beans, peas, and there was some citrus as well. Sweet potatoes were grown on Russell Drysdale's property, much to the delight of the bandicoots. There were also dairy farms along Maitland Bay Drive. During World War II, the highest point in our coast, above Bombay Point, was the site of an important radar station which tracked all passing ships. Unfortunately, it didn't pick up the midget submarines and their mothership. In 1942, there were 23 RAF men and 18 WAF women there. One Day's Diary in 1944 reports bushfires in the area, and the WAFs found a valuable job to do. The girls of the unit carried steaming tea and sandwiches down to the tired firefighters. This was a welcome break, and we worked on with renewed vigour. The Maitland Bay store dates from the 1950s, and here are John and Dulcie Wall outside their store with some local produce advertised for sale. Their son Barry recalls the following events.
John Wall was contacted by the divers who found the bell of the Maitland, and the bell was brought up to the store for safekeeping with Dad's help. A lot of blood, sweat and tears were spilt doing it. With hammer and chisel, Dad chipped a sign into a rock, "Good waters in Ferns." Today that sign should still be there, and the water is very sweet.
John's right. The sign is still there today, although it's covered in lichens, but we strongly suggest you don't drink the water. In later years, the Maitland Bay store was transformed into the Maitland Bay Information Centre, thanks to the National Parks and Wildlife Service and the wonderful work of Alan and Beryl Strom and their many, many helpers. The preservation of much of the peninsula as Bouddi National Park goes back to the story of Murray Byles, which is well told in our CD-ROM by Anne MacLeod, who describes how, from the Palm Beach holiday house, Murray gazed through a telescope to the rugged stretch of untouched coastline beyond the Hawkesbury River. Bowing to visit her fairy lands forlorn, she convinced a group of university girlfriends to accompany her to explore the area, carrying canvas ground sheets and quilts for sleeping, just enough food for their survival, and a Colt 45 for protection. They struggled through dense scrub with the help of a map, compass, and a tomahawk. Finally, they made their way to a secluded beach, now known as Maitland Bay. Elated, they took off their skirts and danced on the sand in their bloomers. Comment: sadly, no photos are available of this event. With fellow members of the Sydney Bushwalkers Club, Murray explored this area further in the 1930s. That's her on the left foreground. Read our CD-ROM for a fuller story. Murray and her fellow club members set up camp at the beach and enjoyed the delights of this pristine place. Well, not quite pristine, as you'll notice a humpy at the right rear, which was used by fishermen at what was first called Fisherman's Beach. Travelling further back in time, this beach was the scene of the tragic wreck of the coastal paddle steamer Maitland, a wild and stormy morning on the 5th of May, 1898. "24 people died, and the Herald reporter wrote, 'Looking at the wreck, it seems wonderful how anyone from the forepart of the ship ever passed alive over the angry foam with its ugly points of jutting rocks between the vessels and the shore.' In the years since the wreck, there have been stories of ghosts at Maitland Bay. You can read more in Jill Baxter's book, Reflections from the Beach and the Bays. Here is Cyril Hayden telling of his meeting with a ghost as he fished from one of the boilers, as recorded during the research for Jill's book.
I was fishing away and I was catching fish, which is important because if you're not catching fish, you might daydream. But I certainly wasn't daydreaming. And I was caught a fish and I put it on. You had to put it under your arm. You had nowhere to put it. We had a bag over our necks that we put the fish into and our bait into a little pocket in the front of it. So I was slipping this hook out of the fish to slip him into the bag, and a fellow came from the same area as Anand had occupied, and he looked over my shoulder as I was taking the fish off the hook and putting it in the bag, and then when I completed that I had to bait up again, which I did, took a little bit of bait out of the pocket, put it on the hook, and he was still watching me, and then he went behind me, and I realised now that I've got to make a swinging movement with my right arm and with the fish bait on it and the hook exposed. I couldn't do so because he would have been in my road and walked into the hook, and I thought it was Anand again, you see. And I looked over my right shoulder then to tell him to move on so that I could make my cast, you see. And it was just all hand lining, this caper. And when I looked around, there was just nobody there. No, and this fellow was standing as close to me as you are. In fact, he was closer. He was actually looking over my shoulder. I reckon if he was breathing, I could have heard him breathing.
Beverly White, née Anand, remembers the ghost too.
We would often hike to Maitland Bay and camp overnight. We carried everything we needed, and we would cook the fish we caught and roast the potatoes in the coals. An eye was kept out for the ghosts of the Maitland wreck, and at dark we were all so scared. If we'd seen any sign of them, I think we'd have run back up that track non-stop.
I'm sure that with daylight dawning on such a beautiful place, all their fears would have vanished away. We're grateful to all the people who provided us with vivid memories and evocative photos, and we conclude with two more reflections on life in earlier days. Firstly, Sue Thompson remembers the joys of kids and the realities of mums. Ursula Old did the delightful painting called May Holidays.
Growing up in Kilcare with my parents and my brother Phil was the best experience a child could have. The wonderful community, the characters, the freedom, sun, surf, and a great school with caring teachers. And let's not forget the abundance of seafood selection. In summer you could be eating any variety of fish, oysters, prawns, crab or mussels, especially with Dad being such a knowledgeable fisherman. Mum had the hard duties, like most in those days. I've fond memories of her cooking on the old fuel stove that came with the house. Great in winter, but not so in summer. We'd always do the traditional hot Christmas dinner, and everyone would swelter. The party hats and bonbons made up for the heat a little. We all enjoyed the new electric stove in later years. I can remember Mum pulling me up those 60 steps in my stroller. I'd have been only 2 or 3 years old then. I would be giggling away, totally unaware of the struggle my mother was having.
Beverly Wyatt, née Anand, provides us with a final reflection.
How could my family and myself have been so lucky growing up in a special place with the best childhood memories anyone could have wanted? Newcomers will never experience the beautiful life we had in the early days.
And the very last words go to the Glucas sisters with their father's song Kilcare, oh Kilcare.
Just down the rip, past Booker Bay, keep right on sailing, you'll reach Hardy's Bay. When you get there, go to Kilcare. If it's pleasure you're seeking, you'll find it right there. Kilcare, oh Kilcare, why would you go back to Kilcare? See all you can, every man, then take a look at the girls with their high ties, time flies, everyone says over there. Well, ta-ta, my dear, we're coming next year.